Time for the Behavior Bureau. My co-host, Jenny Hutt. We've been talking about a father. I use the term choking on it a little bit. He injects himself and his own son with a potentially deadly dose of heroin. They both have survived. And now the father faces attempted murder charges. Joining us now, psychologist, family therapist Wendy Schwartz, criminologist Casey Jordan, host of Wives with Knives on Investigation Discovery, clinical and forensic psychologist Cheryl Errett, and the human lie detector Janine Driver. She consulted with the FBI, the CIA, and the Bureau of Alcohol and Tobacco and Firearms. She is the author of You Can't Lie to Me. Casey, I said something to my producing staff, and they sort of went, whoa, that's surprising. This is not a story about heroin. This is a story about malignant narcissism or something on that order. Would you agree?
Yes, and it manifests itself in revenge. And Dr. Drew, I have seen a lot of these cases in the last decade or so. 20 years ago, there was a man, Brian Stewart, who injected his 4-year-old son with HIV-tainted blood so that he could get out of paying child support. The great news is that that young man is still alive today, now in his early 20s. But there is almost no limits that people will go to get back at the wife, the soon-to-be ex-wife or the ex-wife, and harming the child is, I agree with Jenny, it's a whole different level of trying to hurt someone. Not hurt them, but hurt the thing they love the most, the child. And that really is a level of psychopathy that we need to look at.
And Cheryl, take people through that again, what Casey's talking about. What has to go on in one's brain in order to be able to do something like this to a child in order to get back at a spouse?
Well,
to your child.
Exactly, your child. We are talking about someone with malignant narcissism, where they are looking at that child not as a separate being or a person who they love or a separate entity, but as an extension of themselves and as a chess piece on a chessboard, that this is a way to accomplish the goal of hurting the other person as much as possible. So the more the mother or the other parent loves that child, the more they can see hurting that child as an instrument to get back at revenge, to hurt the other parent. They're not even looking at empathy or humanity or what they're doing to their own child. It's shocking.
Janine, go ahead, and Gina, I'll let you talk in a second, but also that people have been, Brian, I think, used the term evil as well as sick here. Go ahead.
Dr. Drew, Josh Powell, you may remember this case too. 2009, Susan Powell goes missing. Supposedly the husband took the 2 boys in the middle of the winter out camping, and she never reappeared, right? So she ends up dead. He says he comes home, the wife is missing. And eventually the custody is taken away of these 2 young boys. By the time they're 5 and 7, he has a supervised visit out in the state of Washington. He takes them from the social worker, puts them in the house, blows up the house, lights it on fire, and kills his 2 boys. Well, why would he do that if his wife is missing? Guess what, Dr. Drew? He moved him and those 2 boys to Washington, the state of Washington, where Susan Powell's parents live. I met Susan Powell's father one time. I was speaking at an event in Seattle, Washington, and it was heart-wrenching for them to have their 2 little grandsons up the street visiting their lunatic father, and he killed them. Why? To punish them is what my thoughts are. I'm not a psychologist, but we see this happening all the time in law enforcement.
And Wendy, I'll let you ring in. You're nodding your head vigorously.
Oh, gosh, I think we're all going crazy and heartbreaking story. And, you know, they just need a window, one little window of opportunity to go and hurt that child. The fact that this father had a history of all the problems that he did, and the fact that mom kind of thought this was okay childcare. But you know, I always say to my clients, Dr. Drew, if mama's not happy, nobody's happy. And the way to get to the mom was to get the dad to hurt the baby. And it's heartbreaking and it's frightening that in 2 seconds this can happen.
You're so right, Wendy. And Jenny, it's interesting. It's rarely the women that do this, and it's usually men in divorce that are trying to get back at a spouse, right?
Well, listen, I don't know what that's about, because thankfully I'm not with a man that would ever hurt our kids, thank God. But, like, I just think of that little boy, Dr. Drew. Like, that's what I'm imagining, this poor little boy in bed with his daddy, and the next thing, it's out of control for me and so outrageous that it makes me physically ill.
And Casey, I was tilting towards this idea of evil. Why don't you give your thoughts on this? This is psychopathy. This is missing a part of your brain that makes us human. Is that evil?
I don't think this particular father was evil. I will agree he's sick, and probably his mental illness was manifest in drug addiction because he is trying to drown his pain. It doesn't excuse it in any way at all. But I've seen evil, and usually evil does not succumb to drug addiction because it really enjoys the feeling of evil and doesn't try to kill it.
And how did nobody know? That's what makes me crazy. How did nobody know that there were drugs in the home, that dad had a different type of a behavior, the child's grooming was on or off? I always believe there are red flags, and you just have to pay attention to them. There was some kind of indication. Someone had to have seen something. Neighbors, some kind of babysitters, something else was going on.
Cheryl, finish me
Well,
up.
I think that the mother was under the impression that he had quit, but I think this was a big, dangerous situation because of an anniversary reaction of a significant date. This would have been the date that their divorce had been final. And I wanted to say that one of the toughest things for the kids in these situations, if they do survive the attack by the parent, is somehow making sense of the fact that their mother or father could do this to them and then having to grow up making sense of that and working through it. So that's the reverberation that stays long after what happened.
If you let that pain in, I challenge anybody to imagine, put themselves in the position of that child. Let that pain in and imagine what that child is experiencing. Good panel, guys. Reminder that tomorrow I will be on...